As hard as it is to resist, really, you should not argue on Facebook comments. I mean, post what you want to post, but when somebody gets on there to argue with you, you should really do your best to not argue. And I know that you're going to fail. We're all human, and it's extremely addicting. Not even addicting. It's just hard to resist. But here's why you shouldn't do it. Because part of the problem with Facebook is that there's really low investment. I mean, they're kind of scrolling through as a kind of entertainment, really. It's just light entertainment. It's really brief things, low investment, very low investment. So if they see something, they'll make a comment, but they won't explain it. They won't, very often they won't go into any detail. They won't take very much time. They're usually typing with their thumbs. They're just not going to say much. They're just going to say just some quick little thing. It's low investment. And then, if you're arguing back, usually you're doing the same thing. You're not writing a 20-page thesis on exactly why you believe that. You're also, it lends itself to brief comments. And for a controversial issue, that's not a good format. And not only that, on top of all of that, you don't have any nonverbals to go with it. If you were sitting down person to person talking to this person, you would probably find that you don't disagree as much as you think you do. And there would be so many other nonverbals along with it that you would be able to have probably, with most of these people, you'd probably be able to have a very civil conversation, even a friendly conversation, talking about the same things, even if you're disagreeing. But that just doesn't happen on Facebook. Not very often. Unless you have already established a really good relationship with this person. And that's the other factor. The more controversial the issue that you're talking about, the stronger your bond with that person needs to be if you're going to talk about it. It really doesn't really work on Facebook or even in person, talking about a controversial issue with somebody that you have a very weak bond with. So the way my wife talks about it is that it's like you have a pipeline between you, and it can only hold so much depending on how close you are with each other. If you know each other really well, you spend a lot of time talking to each other, your pipeline is very large and can handle big flows, big issues. But if you only know somebody superficially, that relationship, that communication pipeline between you can't really handle a big flow. So that's another factor. But there's still another factor why you personally should not argue on Facebook. And that has to do with when you write something down and make it public, it makes it harder for you to change your mind. Now listen to this. And that's true, obviously, for the other person too. They're making this comment, they're making it public, and they're putting it in writing. And now they've just made it much more difficult for them to change their mind. And of course, also the fact that you're arguing with them. Like whenever somebody disagrees with you, you have a tendency to fortify your position, to argue your position stronger, which makes you even more convinced that you're right. But there's just a simple psychological factor of putting something in writing and making it public. Here's an experiment from the book Influence that demonstrates that principle. So you ever seen those? It's an optical illusion. It's two lines next to each other, and one has the arrows facing out and one has the arrows facing in. It's a really common standard sort of optical illusion. And the one with the arrows pointing out, or away, that extend the line, make it really look longer. I mean, even when you stare at it and know that it's not longer, when you look at it, it looks like that line is longer, but it's actually not. It's an optical illusion. So in an experiment, they showed subjects, these lines and had them decide which one was longer. And for some of them, they just had them say it out loud. For some of them, they had it write it on one of those magic pads that kids use. You write it on there, and then you can just lift up this little plastic sheet and it erases it. And then the third group, they had them write it out and then sign it and hand it in to the researcher. Okay. And then for all of them, they were all given more information. In other words, these two lines are exactly the same length. And they would maybe hold up a ruler or whatever so that you can see they're the same length or whatever. Or maybe they just told them. I don't know. We don't know that kind of detail, but they gave them information that should have changed their mind. And for those who had just stated their opinion verbally, they more easily changed those are the ones that changed their minds the easiest. More of them changed their mind. The ones who'd written it on the magic pad and then was able to erase it, they changed their mind, but not as much as the ones that did it verbally. And the ones that wrote it down and signed it and handed it in were very unlikely. Very few of them changed their mind. They were very resistant to changing their mind. And this is what's happening with Facebook. So if somebody argues their position and you argue with them, you engage with them, they double down on their position, writing it down and making it public. And you've just made them even more firmly stuck in their position. It's almost impossible to change someone's mind that way, which is really probably what you're trying to do, and why you are so driven to answer it and to argue with it is because you want to change their mind. Well, I'm telling you, it's almost impossible to do that way. So therefore, you should express your point of view, post what you want on Facebook, but just don't argue with people. It just doesn't work for all of those reasons. When we come back, we'll talk about what you should do if you find yourself making the mistake of arguing on Facebook. This Atom Bomb podcast episode is sponsored by Anchor, a podcast platform, the one I'm using to make this podcast. It's super easy to use and allows you to easily create your own podcast. You can record and edit your audio right onto the app. In fact, you can do everything on your phone. Anchor also makes it easy to monetize your podcast and get wide distribution. Anchor automatically makes your podcast available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. You can download the Anchor app for free or go to anchor.fm to get started. Now, I also think you should forgive yourself when you do sometimes just indulge yourself. You just can't help it. You dive in and you want to say that. And sometimes you might do it because you know that there's other people listening and you want to influence them, which is a legitimate way of, but just know that it's probably not going to change the mind of the person that you're talking to. And if that's what your goal is, then don't waste your time. If you really want to change their mind, have lunch with them, get to know them better, get a really good connection with them, and then talk about it. This is Adam Lee Kahn on the Atom Bomb.